Okay, so let's finish talking about cable networks. So I believe I left off on this slide. And so bear in mind that HBO, along with Cinemax, was the first premium cable network. And I do also believe just cable network in general to multiplex. In the case of a company like HBO, they're not going to make any money off of advertising. So for a company like HBO, they're going to multiplex because they want to attract a different audience and because they want to increase their per subscriber fees. So in other words, how much they charge a subscriber of HBO. So bear that in mind that they were the first multiplex, and generally premium cable networks multiplex because they want a different audience and for more increase per subscription revenue or fees. And so they also were able to make revenue streams or create a revenue stream off their DVD rentals or sell-throughs. And so people would buy, for instance, programming that belonged to HBO, whether that was the Game of Thrones, or if you think about The Sopranos, they would buy this sort of programming and keep it for their personal libraries. And so HBO was able to create a relatively lucrative revenue stream with these DVD rentals and sell-throughs. Also, the first original film, which is I believe this is where I left off on the last lecture on Wednesday, and I was talking about the Terry Fox story. And Terry Fox was again a Canadian who ended up running across the country of Canada with one leg. If you're not familiar with Terry Fox, this is a little bit about his story.
Maybe I won't make it, but if it's up to me, I think I can do it.
Terry Fox was an 18-year-old from British Columbia when he was diagnosed with bone cancer in his right knee. Amputation and chemotherapy left him with an artificial leg, and memories of those still in the cancer ward.
Kids my age and younger, and you just can't leave something like that and try and forget it. And I couldn't anyway. I had to try and do something about it.
And so he did. Terry trained on his new leg for 14 months, then told his family that he would run east to west across Canada, hoping to raise $1 million for cancer research. On April 12, 1980, at the easternmost point of Canada, it began, the Marathon of Hope. And Terry would do it by running 26 miles, a marathon, every single day. With his best friend Doug Alward and brother Daryl following in a support van, 21-year-old Terry would rise at 4 a.m. to run 12 miles, rest, then do 14 miles in the afternoon, seeking donations across lonely expanses of highway. In Toronto, thousands cheered him. For Canadians, Terry had become an inspirational hero. But what inspired Terry were the children he was trying so hard to help. Children like Greg Scott.
I'm crying now because there's somebody here right now who is going through the same thing that I went through. Exact same thing, and he's only 10 years old. And I had the most inspirational day of my life today.
And so Terry gave himself an afternoon off from the Marathon of Hope to swim with Greg. It was just the fourth day off in 137 days on the road. As he approached the city of Thunder Bay on September 1st, Terry Fox had run 3,339 miles. He was on this stretch of road at this white marker when he asked to be taken to the hospital. From a stretcher, Terry shared the news of his diagnosis.
The cancer had spread, and now I've got cancer in my lungs. And we got to go home and try and do some more treatment. But all I can say is if there's any way I can get out there again and finish it, I will.
So that's a little bit about Terry Fox. Again, as you see here, he passed away on June 28, 1981. He didn't succeed in terms of running across Canada with one leg, but he did succeed in raising a whole lot of money for cancer research. And so he's still considered to be a hero within the, I guess, the people who do research on cancer. And really, I think amongst Canadians, I think that he's still considered to be a hero. And certainly, if you've watched the entire documentary, which happens to be on YouTube, you will also think of him as a hero, because he really was a true heroic thing that he was trying to do. This idea of, again, trying to run across Canada with one leg is just it's astounding, honestly. Anyway, so moving on from Terry Fox, we have the idea of no advertiser pressure, racier content. So one of the things that HBO sort of has an advantage over, let's say, basic cable networks or even traditional television networks, is that there's no advertiser pressure. They can do whatever they want with their content. It can be very violent. It can be very racy in terms of its language, and so in terms of its violence. And so basically, writers have a lot more freedom, and so do the filmmakers have a lot more freedom with HBO, because they really don't have to worry about offending anybody. So that enables them to produce racier content. Some would argue that it also allow them to do better content. I don't know. So the one big issue, of course, when it comes to HBO content, at least when it comes to syndication, is if it does get syndicated to a traditional television network or even a basic cable television network, they have to edit the content out. So because basic cable networks don't operate the same way that, let's say, an HBO does or a Showtime. Premium cable networks have a lot more freedom with their content than basic cable networks. So in the case of a traditional television network or a basic cable network, if they wanted to syndicate HBO content, they would have to edit out a lot of its content or some of its content, which they call standards and practices, if they want to do any sort of syndication. So a couple of shows that HBO is famous for, we have The Sopranos, that aired from 1999, 2007, a great drama, just a tremendous drama, great writing, great acting. Some consider it to be one of the best television dramas of all time. Again, it's considered to be one of the best television dramas of all time. The Game of Thrones, which lasted from 2011 to 2019, was very successful in terms of increasing HBO's viewership. It's the most watched HBO show ever. So again, most watched HBO show ever. It earned 58 Primetime Emmy Awards, which is the most for a drama. And again, some argue that this is the best drama ever. I mean, there's been lots of great dramas produced in the history of cable TV. So is this the best? Well, I don't know. But it certainly is quite good. Now, HBO Now, which started in 2015, it charges $15 a month, is a current effort by HBO to bring in more audience and more subscribers to this particular streaming service. They're up against some tough competition, whether that competition be Disney Plus or Netflix. And so what they're doing, which is a little bit different than, let's say, Disney Plus did, is essentially what HBO is doing is they're going to put up 17 movies. So again, 17 movies They're going to place these movies onto their streaming service. And the hope is that these 17 movies are going to attract more subscribers, as well as keep the current subscriber base happy in order to grow their subscriber base. So again, they're moving 17 movies that were supposed to be released theatrically, and obviously because of COVID, they did not. And these movies are going to be streamed instead. And again, 17. And the hope is that it's going to not only keep their current subscriber base happy, but again, increase their subscriber base, hopefully, ideally. So the Telecom Act of 1996, signed under President Bill Clinton, it basically allows media conglomerates like, let's say, a Disney, to own regular television networks like, let's say, an ABC, but they're also able to own cable networks. So essentially, the Telecom Act enabled media conglomerates to become bigger and more powerful. So $85 billion is the amount of revenue made by cable television networks, and their top revenue streams, so the two primary ones, is licensing content. So again, number one primary revenue stream is licensing content. In other words, selling content that these networks make, and then they sell them to other networks. That was, again, the primary revenue stream was licensing content. The second revenue stream for cable networks is advertising revenue. So again, licensing content, number one. Number two, advertising revenue is the second biggest revenue stream. So subscribers are diminishing with age. As people get older, they tend to be less likely to be subscribers of cable. What is the top cable network in terms of revenue? The top cable network in terms of revenue is AT&T. So again, AT&T is the top cable network company in terms of making revenue. And bear in mind that AT&T owns lots of premium cable networks, as well as they own lots of basic cable networks. So again, AT&T is number one in terms of revenue. Number two, if you're curious, that would be Disney. Number three would be Viacom. And certainly the market structure would be an oligopoly, because a handful of companies are making money off of cable networks. So again, it is an oligopoly. So it's very hard nowadays for a single independent cable network to survive in modern day right now. So let's just say that, one of my friends did have a cable network that he started called C Television many years ago, and he just said it was very difficult for an independent to survive, because an independent cable network essentially has to approach all the cable system operators and try to get their permission, or try to get to convince them to carry that particular network. So again, it's very difficult for a single cable television network to survive. Nowadays, if a cable network wants to survive, it needs to be owned, or most of them are owned by one of these large media conglomerates, whether it's Disney or AT&T or Viacom or NBC Universal. So in the modern structure, it's very difficult for a single independent cable network to survive. So basic cable, or a basic cable network, some examples, I gave you the example of MTV or ESPN, and that is defined as transmitted without encryption. So transmitted without encryption. It's connected to satellite and coaxial cable, and it's the self-regulation of content. So again, transmitted without encryption. It's connected to satellite or coaxial cable, and it's self-regulation of content. Superstations, which were created by Ted Turner, essentially means a basic cable TV station licensed by the FCC to use the satellite. So basic cable TV station licensed by the FCC to use the satellite. Premium, HBO, Star, Showtime, Cinemax, those are all examples of premium. So you pay an additional fee for premium cable. They are encrypted. They also offer pay-per-views, which means that it's a split between the television producer or cable producer or the producer of the show, whoever that happens to be, and the cable system operator. And generally speaking, for premium cable, it offers a lot more adult content. So 3 primary reasons why networks multiplex. So number 1, different audience. So for instance, an ESPN, for instance, would multiplex because they want a different audience. So in other words, they might have, let's say, an ESPN en Español. And so they would obviously are trying to target Spanish language viewers with that particular channel. Number 2, they want to increase their advertising revenue. So they want to increase their advertising revenue. And so this applies again to basic cable. So if you think about, again, ESPN or let's say an MTV or TBS, or I should say ESPN or an MTV, they multiplex because they want to generate more advertising revenue. The more channels they have, the more slots they have to sell to advertisers. And number 3, the reason that networks multiplex, and this applies to both basic as well as premium, is they want to increase their per subscriber fees. So they want to increase their per subscriber fees. This applies to both basic cable as well as premium cable channels like HBO. So I'll repeat the 3 again. Different audience is number 1. Generate more ad revenue is number 2. And number 3, they want to increase their per subscriber fees. In other words, how much they charge the cable system operators and the satellite operators. Now, they operate under what's called most favored nation. Most favored nation means that these networks essentially cannot sell their content. They have to sell their content to cable system operators and satellite operators. And they all have to sell them at the same price, right? So ESPN cannot sell its network to Dish for $7 and then turn around and charge a charter only $5. They have to operate on what's called most favored nation. In other words, if ESPN is going to charge $7 to Dish Network, they also have to charge $7 to charter. Yeah. In other words, most favored nation means they have to, all the cable systems and all the satellite operators are being charged the same amount by these cable networks. So programming factors. And so content has become incredibly important, not only in the cable world, but just in general on television, some would say across the board in entertainment. And so what we're seeing now is more original content because there's pressure to keep subscribers. So a lot of these cable networks, whether it's premium or basic, want to keep subscribers. And so there's a lot of pressure to keep subscribers. And so they're creating more and more original content because they want to keep subscribers. And so there's a lot of competition out there amongst all these different streaming services, amongst all the television networks, cable networks, et cetera, et cetera. There really is what's called right now content war. Everybody's trying to make the best content possible to attract the most number of subscribers. And so other factors that go into programming is obviously you want the programming to fit the brand. Now, this doesn't apply to all television networks or cable networks, I should say. It applies to some. So again, going back to the idea of Lifetime, let's say Lifetime or ESPN, the programming should fit the brand, right? So if they're going to have a documentary, let's say on ESPN, it should be sort of a sports-oriented documentary. If they're going to have, let's say, a show on a program on Lifetime, it should fit the target audience, whatever that target audience is or that brand is. Advertisers plays a very important role just in terms of interest. So just the ability to sell advertising time, especially on basic cable networks, is very important for the life of that program, but also for the television, for the cable network to be able to operate as a profit. It has to be able to attract advertisers, and so they use their content to attract advertisers, so they can use these commercials to reach their audience. Licensing or production costs, and so how much does programming cost? It just really depends, right? It depends on whether or not the program is first run or if it's a rerun. So reruns are going to generally cost a little bit less than first run, not always, but often. How much does it cost to acquire a canceled television program or a syndicated feature film? Generally speaking, the way it works on cable is that they usually give you 10 runs at about 15% of the US box office. And so this is one of the reasons why, for instance, The Shawshank Redemption, I don't know if anybody watches that movie. Even though it's quite good, it was a box office bust. And so because the movie didn't perform well theatrically, it's very inexpensive to acquire for cable networks. And this is why you'll often see it being played on various basic cable networks, because it's relatively inexpensive. Seasons. So for premium cable, it really ranges from the rule of thumb, and well, there really is no rule of thumb for premium cable. It could be 12 or 13 episodes, but it could be as low as 8 episodes. It could be 7 episodes for a season. And so again, for premium cable, it could be 12 to 13 episodes equals 1 season, but it also might be, 7 or 8. It just really varies, and that equals 1 season. For basic cable, it also varies. It could be 12 or 13 episodes equals 1 season, but it could also be 20 to 26 episodes. Again, basic cable varies even more than premium cable. Now, oftentimes, especially basic cable will stagger their premiere dates when they premiere their new shows. Generally speaking, the cable networks will often premiere their shows in October to avoid competition with the traditional television networks, which they both, generally speaking, will air or begin to air their new shows starting in September. And cable, again, often airs their new show starting in October. So ESPN is the most expensive basic cable network right now in the marketplace. It's over $7. It's really expensive. And so right now, ESPN, even though at one time it was a huge cash cow for Disney, now there's some real big issues with ESPN that Disney has to deal with. And so the 3 problems essentially are, number one, there's no need to watch most of their programming, right? Because that is their first problem. We all have the internet. We all have apps. You could all watch other sports networks. So outside of their sports programming, you don't need to watch their, Sports Center or their talk shows or any of this other stuff that ESPN airs. So you don't need to watch most of their programming. The only ones that you need to watch are, some football games and maybe some basketball games. So that's issue number 1. You don't need to watch most of their programming. Number 2 is cord cutting. So again, number 2, cord cutting or churn. So again, number 2, cord cutting or churn. A lot of you are cutting the cord. You no longer feel the need to have an ESPN subscription. And so there's a lot of folks out there, especially younger folks, that are cutting the cord. And number 3, the third big problem for ESPN is expensive sports content. So even though the revenue that ESPN is generating is diminishing because it's losing subscribers, the cost of sports content keeps increasing, right? The basketball content, the baseball content, the football content keeps increasing in terms of what the major sports leagues are asking for in terms of a price. And so even the price of sports content keeps increasing as ESPN's revenue is decreasing. So it's really facing some very big issues, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to ESPN moving forward. So again, the three big issues are there's no need to watch most of their programming because we have the internet, we have apps, we have other sports networks. In other words, if you want to see who won the game, you could always check the internet to see who won the game. You don't need to watch Sports Center. So that's the first problem. The second problem is churn, right? This idea that a lot of people are cutting the cord. And so just to kind of give you an example, back in 2011, ESPN had over 100 million subscribers. Now it's about 82, something like that. So it's lost a lot of subscribers over, the past, within the past 10 years, it's lost a lot of subscribers. It's a lot of revenue it's lost. Number three is the expensive sports content. So the price of sports keeps increasing as the network's revenue is decreasing. So that's the third big problem. And that concludes my lecture for cable network.